Could grief be affecting your life and you don't even know it? And do people have their reasons for holding on to their grief? This is going to be a really good conversation. And my name's Leah, and I'm here with Liz, the co-creator of Cognomovement, the author of Suffering is Optional and the Tiny Book of Big Manifesting, a master NLP practitioner, and the host of New Life Perspectives on UK Health Radio.
Hello.
Okay, if you're watching this, most of you know us. But Liz, what do you think about this question that I posed? So, could grief be affecting your life and you don't even know it?
The answer is a resounding hell yes. It's one of those really sneaky ones, grief, that we don't realize is part of our lives. Because if we haven't lost someone recently, like to death, we usually think about grief as someone died, but grief is anything we've lost or anything we really deeply regret, actually, too. So it could be 1,000 things, like a lost love. It could be having attended school, but having taken the wrong thing, like maybe became a teacher, but you forgot you were supposed to be an archaeologist. I know someone like that, right? Or maybe you went to school, but it really just you messed around. You didn't do well, and you didn't get, the job or the career that you wanted. It could even be things like aging. People grieve aging. And I said this in the last chat that even people in their 20s, when they're 20 turning to 30, there can be a big grief around that because they weirdly think they're old, right? So this grieving, this having lost something that is impossible to get back, that's usually the hallmark of grief. We can't get the thing back, and our nervous system goes into a little bit of shock around that. And it keeps bumping into, I want to change that, but I can't because the person died, or the time has passed, or all the millions of things. So grief is a big sneaky that hides draining our energy for most of us, really, and also to varying degrees. The most obvious one is, have you lost to death someone very significant in your life? That's one that's very obvious. The others are not so obvious, and that's why I say it's sneaky.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to point out with our grief class that's coming up on Saturday, releasing grief and actually being able to release it from your body and move on. It's a really important thing to point out that it's not just if you lost somebody that you loved in death, it's losing a relationship. It's losing all of those things that you listed. It literally could be, you're a parent and you miss being able to go out to the clubs and you miss who you were before you were a parent. Like that is something that some of my friends even deal with. And it's also a big conflict because you love your children. You would never wish that you didn't have them. You love your life, but you miss this piece of you.
Exactly. That's a huge one. And it's one that nobody wants to admit to, that you miss your own kind of sovereignty, because once you have children, your life is theirs. I mean, that's the thing. And that's wonderful and amazing, but you can't go back to who you were when you could make all your own decisions just for you. For women, we often can't go back to what our body looked like before we had children. There's a whole cascade. It changes your life entirely. And even though most people consider it the best thing that ever happened in their lives, there is a piece that you grieve that you can't move on. Do you know marriage is like this too? Even the happiest couples, there's this tiny thing that runs underneath. Like, I have to make decisions for two people. I can't ever make a decision that's just for the betterment of me most of the time. So people don't realize that can be an undercurrent. It also can be a thread in a marriage that causes contention and fights. And you're irritated and frustrated and you don't know why. And actually, what it is a bit of grieving for your singular self, right? But here's what I want to point out. I pointed out in the last video that really what it is shock in the nervous system. That's the function that the nervous system runs to run grief. And shock is one of those things that sort of prevents other things from happening in your brain and in your body and in your healing. It's sort of all consuming, and it's like the brain's just a little bit knocked off its base, kind of, like a glitch in a computer. Imagine dropping your laptop. It's kind of like that. It's just a little bit askew. In really, really current recent grief, like someone died, your husband or your parent or your child, it's all consuming. Like it consumes absolutely everything. But the biggest point I want to make is it's a feeling in the body. Grief is the body suffering. That's the big thing. There is a discomfort in your system, an underlying running yuck, low levels of energy. And what's super important about this is it causes illness. It's that thing that can be really present in autoimmune disorders, and even cancers can be linked back to a severe moment of grief. So it's an important thing to think about. But what I want everybody to notice is, how does it feel in your body? It's a sensation. It's a feeling. It's a neurological pattern that can be changed or deleted.
Absolutely. And so the second part of the question is, well, it's sort of a statement, but people have their reasons. So, which you always say. So do people have their reasons for holding on to grief?
Oh, yeah. Huge reasons for holding on to grief. This is another funny one about grief. I have to say that grief is one of my favorite levels, weirdly, in the Elevate and Illuminate series that we're doing, but also in the big Cogno Conscious event that's coming up in September, where we clear these levels. There's just so much in grief. But people will hold on to grief because they believe it honors the people that they've lost. It's especially big when it's, a parent, a loved one, a child, a spouse. Because if you're holding on to grief, if you're suffering about them, it means you love them. And the other big thing is grief is super societally acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
People expect you to grieve in a certain way, and that means pain and suffering. There was a woman, I think her last name was Smith, who literally went to prison for murdering her children based on one thing. Really, the evidence didn't show that she killed her children. She was attacked too, but she survived. She threw a birthday party at her child's grave. And she and her sister had silly string and balloons, and they were celebrating this child's birth. And that was seen as absolutely insane and proof that she wasn't grieving properly. So in this society, we have a huge weight on our shoulders to grieve properly. And in the past, it was true too. Like, we're Italian. Italian women for, up until very recently were required to wear black societally if their spouse died forevermore. Our cousin's mom, but they were modern, and they kept saying, Mom, okay, enough. After a year, enough. You need to wear regular clothes again, right? But her in-laws, who are the older generation, they did not think that was okay at all. Eventually, her daughters went out and she wore regular clothes again. There's this big pressure to prove you're grieving. And that's just a freaking weird idea that we do not need. Grief is individual. It's pain in the body, right? If you want to let it go, you can. And here's my reason for doing so. It's really personal to you and me, Leah.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost my parents, your grandparents, 35 days apart. And there was this whole time before it of taking care of them that was like years of grief. When they passed, it was a big shock, and we still had so much to do for Cognomovement. We
Hmm.
had a practitioner program that was needed done, and I just couldn't get my mind right. That shock was running so much in my system that my brain wasn't functioning and I couldn't think to work. So I realized that I had to do something about that. And I took Cognomovement, focused on the sensation, and deleted it. But here was my reason. I wanted my eyes to light up when I think about them because their lives were not this tragic death. They were incredible humans, right?
Hmm.
Incredible humans. We could go on for days. But the end of their life was tragic. I did not want to honor their memories by me only focusing on the tragedy because my body was in shock. So I made the decision for myself to delete the suffering part in my physical body, that pain you experience. And now when I think of them, my eyes light up. And there were also little moments like in the summer, I used to make my mom this certain pie, and I'll think, oh, I'll make a berry pie, right? And then I remember she's gone. And there's this momentary sadness, but that's not grief. It's just a remembering, oh, yeah, they're not here. Then I remember, my body allows me to remember picking the berries, making the pie, all the hilarity that went on around that thing. But if my body was in grief, I would just start suffering again. And it actually does nobody any good. It's not valuable. There's not resource in it.
That's also a an answer to the next question, which is if you release the grief from your body, are you dishonoring your family member? And it's just like you said, if you don't have the suffering, you're able to really celebrate them and really think of the wonderful times. And it's not, it's something that they would want, which people say all the time, and it can be annoying. Like, oh, they wouldn't want you to suffer. Well, great, I'm suffering anyway. Like, if you can release the grief, then it's what they would want for you to continue on. And the grief really not only um, is there to honor your loved one, but it stops you from doing so many other things in your life. It stops you from moving on, even the kinds of grief that we were talking about that aren't from losing a loved one. And going back to what you said about society being, you know, very kind of pro grief and suffering, people have their reasons for holding on to grief. And it's not just for honoring a loved one. It's not just for to make your family happy. So it seems like you grieved enough. It's because society rewards suffering. Like society doesn't reward you if you're doing amazing after somebody dies, which is what we all really want is for somebody to do amazing. We don't want you to suffer, but society wants you to suffer because then you get rewarded. Then you've paid your dues.
Yeah, it's like Oprah. I used to always say nobody ever got on Oprah because their life was amazing. They had to have the tragedy story to get on. We really, really reward suffering. But I want to say this. Something you said is really important is that it's holding you from moving forward. So whatever caused your grief is in the past, but its effects maybe are now in the present. And there's nothing about grief, about suffering in the body, is my point that I mean, um, launches you into the future. You're constantly going back to the past and grabbing a handful of pain and just adding it to today. It's kind of like if you make a smoothie every morning, but you go outside and grab a handful of dirt that might have some dog poop in it and add it to your smoothie every day. I mean, no one would do that, but we do it with the griefs of our past. And because it's grief, it's considered honorable. Like, we don't think it's okay to do that with anger or fear or guilt. Well, maybe guilt, but we really don't, we really think it's perfectly fine to do with grief, and we all praise it and honor it. However, there isn't anything about that that actually helps you, that's resourceful, that makes you happy. And one thing I like to consider about this that's more a logical mind thing, and you said it is the thing that you're, especially a person that you're grieving, would they really want the rest of your life to be in suffering? Really, probably not. So if you turn on your logical mind, you think, what is the resource in this? You might run into the same idea that we do, that there's not a resource. I want to quantify something. Um, when a person has just lost someone very close to them, there is a thing, relationships are two neurological systems, two nervous systems having a conversation. There is a form of withdrawal that happens to the body, right? There is a kind of pain and suffering. I think what we're pointing out here is that a person gets to choose how long that pain and suffering goes on and use their logical mind to decide that length.
Mm.
Even when a person has lost someone a week ago, the pain in the body can be diminished so the mind can think. We've done this often and recently with people who, have just lost someone but have to manage their estate right now. People who've lost a child but actually have another child that they still have to care for. They don't have the ability to completely fall apart because there's some aspect of their life that has to go on. And so we've been able to turn that down to a level where the mind can think, the body can heal, you can start to eat again while you move through that period of time, where there's, I want to say it's an appropriate amount of shock, where the body kind of detoxes from that neurological withdrawal.
Yeah, I was just thinking, without the kind of work that we do with grief, which we are doing another one on Saturday for a group of people, and you're welcome to join. If you go to cognomovement.com/elevate, you can learn about it and join the class on Saturday. But I was just thinking, without Cogno Movement, people who have to do that, people who have to go through grief, and they can't fall apart because they have kids to take care of. Their spouses passed, but they have kids to take care of. They have to take care of the estate. They have a business to take care of. They have to make money. They can't fall apart without being able to do exactly what you said. They are literally working off of fumes, like an empty
Yeah.
gas tank. And they are quietly suffering. And it is so, so bad for their mental health. Like, I think about people who I see videos on TikTok all the time and Facebook, and people that we know who have lost a spouse, but they have little ones to take care of. And so they're trying to make everything okay for their kids. They're trying to keep up this very strong act. And in silence, when everybody goes to bed or when they have to go to the bathroom, they're sobbing. And it's actually so much worse for your mental health that way. And so to be able to have a tool that actually helps, that brings you, I don't want to say it fixes it, but it actually releases that from your body so you can genuinely be there for your kids. You can genuinely move forward while still loving and honoring that person. You can still do
Yeah.
life, and you're not living it through fight or flight. You're not, because eventually everything does fall apart because you've
Yeah.
never taken care of yourself.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And I love what you said. Like, you can still honor and love them. And I think that's the part that the grief set does for someone who's lost a family member or someone they love, is that allows you to continue loving them, not just being in devastating, painful grief and loss where your life just stops. And that's where, people end up with these illnesses. The body goes into such aggravation, irritation, frustration that it can't fix the problem. You can't get them back. That it turns on such terrible inflammation in the body that the body ends up sick. There's our statistics about people within 18 months or 2 years of a big tragedy, not just deaths, but a big loss of a business, a loss of a marriage, where their body goes into grief. They end up with cancer and often die because the body just is in such fight or flight, such inflammation. It sort of starts to poison itself. And so that can absolutely be turned off so that the rational mind, the frontal lobes, can come back online and see life for what it really is. A woman who lost a 5-year-old recently told me that another coach told her, we have these weird expectations about life and death. And especially with children, that we don't expect them to die. But less than 100 years ago, children died of blisters, toothaches. They died in childbirth. Death of children was quite common. And people were really expected just to move forward right away because they had to do all the things to take care of life. They couldn't just go to the grocery store. They couldn't order from Walmart and have it delivered. They had to work to have their lives. So it's in our modern age that we have attached a psychological idea to what grief should be. But what it's also done is attached deep, deep suffering that creates illness in a body and in a life.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst way to honor somebody who's lost is to also lose yourself at the same time. When you're grieving, there is sometimes a certain level of attention is kind of a harsh word, but there's this level of people, like people are going to take care of you. They're going to drop food off for you. They're going to say like, oh, she's grieving. She just lost somebody. She can't work. She can't do this. And people come together, which is amazing. When your community comes together to help you, that's amazing. But after a certain point, people have to also move on with their lives and they can't gather around you after a certain amount of time. And going back to in what way is this grief serving you? In what way do you have your reasons to keep your grief? At some point, it's no longer about honoring the person you love, but it's about and it's not always consciously, not that you want this to happen, not that you want to be sick, not that you want to have people caring for you all the time because you can't get yourself together. But there's this subconscious level of like, I'm suffering, so I don't have to move on. I can't move on. I need to be here. I can't work. I can't do anything anymore because I've lost somebody. It becomes your excuse to no longer live your life. And like I said, it's not always in the front of your mind. Your nervous system is responsible for that, which is why we do what we do. But at some point, it becomes your excuse to no longer move on, no longer continue your life.
Yeah, it's really, really true. It becomes all consuming for you. So you believe it should be all consuming for everyone. And actually, there's a secondary grief that happens with this, where all of a sudden people stop rallying. They stop talking about your loss. They stop talking about the devastating accident or whatever it is you've experienced, the loss of your business or your spouse or whatever. But you continue on, and a secondary grief happens when people stop paying attention. And so what will happen, and this is a really interesting phenomenon, more things to grieve show up. Now you're talking about, well, my spouse died, but now I lost my business. Well, now I lost my business. Well, now I have cancer. Well, now I the cancer's better, but now I have this illness. It's a cascading thing because the body also can get addicted to the chemicals it creates because it wants you to pay full attention to this terrible sensation in the body. So it creates real reasons to delete the feeling, this devastating sensation that happens in the body, so that you can move on in a normal, healthy way and start to live life, because that's what life is really for. Here's a really interesting one that also might be super controversial. People whose sexuality is in question, and for whatever reason, they can't come out with that because it's not okay with their family or their society or their religion. And so they start to go into a deep grieving pattern where they become immobilized. They can't move, they can't breathe, they can't do anything. They start to have illnesses that allow them not to move forward, and also garner the attention of the people they so desperately want to see them for who they really are. When this grief is removed from the body, the logical mind goes into effect, and it starts to create strategy for how to live the life you need to live. But before that, it's absolutely impossible. And it becomes that thing, like that's the signature of grief. It's impossible. It's something you can't get back, right? So that's kind of one that no one thinks about, but is pretty prevalent in our society. I think less so now because people have more of the ability to express that, but there's still lots of cases where a person doesn't. And that shows up as grief as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I don't see people really talking about grief this way at all. And I think it's super informative. I'm going to say a word that doesn't exist. It's super informative. And I think it's actually really helpful. So the next helpful piece is, what do we do about it? How do we release our grief to be able to move on with our lives in a much better way?
Well, this is exactly what we're going to do this Saturday as part of the Elevate and Illuminate series that a person can join right now at the Elevate at the grief stage, and also get the previous ones as well. And it's also what we do at the big Cogno Conscious event. But functionally, what it is focusing the body's attention, highlighting the actual physical sensation. And this is really kind of easy when you've just lost someone or it's fresh, but it's less obvious when it's an old grief, like grieving the loss of your body from having children 20 years ago, right? So this is what we help a person do, is really highlight, focus on it, show the body that thing. It's that feeling, it's that drain of energy, it's that creation of inflammation. And then we go about the process of deleting it from your body's programming. It's just like deleting a bad program from your computer. Once you do, the computer stops sending all the energy to it and it works well again. And that's what we do. We use it through accessing the nervous system directly. Cognomovement has this expert way of accessing your nervous system physically, functionally. It's like having a little toolkit, having the Allen wrench and knowing how to reconnect the wire. And it's funny because it happens quite quickly, this emotion collapsing in the body. And then when it does, the rush of energy, the rush of ideas, the ability to strategize again, the ability to actually look at having a real future, a real life, one that is full of whatever you want it to be. This is my big question. And if you're a person who's suffering from grief now, you may not even be able to consider an answer. But at the end of this seminar, you have an answer. You're able to have this answer. Who are you without this pattern of grief in your body and in your life? Who would you be? What else is possible? What are you really capable of? How bright and beautiful can life be if you're not suffering either a little bit or a lot every day? It's a huge question. So consider it for yourself. Can you imagine it? Do you know who you'd be? If the answer is no, you really need to get your butt in this class because if you don't know who you're going to be, you can't get there. And we talk about manifesting a lot, that you really are your own universe. If your universe is filled with pain, that is what your universe will become, what it is. If you know how to release that and start to fill your physical body, your physical field, your field of potential, the field around you with joy and interest and inspiration and strategy, that's what your life becomes. It's actually pretty simple. Where grief is running as a program in your system, you really are limited for having more, better, and best in your life.
So I think this was a really awesome conversation, and there's more to come. If you're interested in joining the class today, just go to cognomovement.com/elevate. You will see the information about the Elevate and Illuminate series, but you can also just join the grief class that's coming up on this Saturday at 4 p.m. If you're interested in Cogno Conscious, go to cognomovement.com/Cogno Conscious to learn more. And let us know in the comments, are you grieving and you didn't even know it? Or are you grieving somebody that you lost and this information was helpful? Let us know in the comments. Make sure wherever you're watching to like this video and subscribe and share it with somebody who really needs to hear it. Thank you, Liz, for having this conversation with me, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.